Okay, so hello everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about how to ace your next interview. My name is Natasha Jones, and I'm the Life and Work Advisor at the Patty Dizzy Center for Life and Work. And just a little overview of what I'll be talking about today. Okay, so jumping into the content for this presentation, I wanted to kind of set the scene a little bit about standard interview processes. And this is what usually happens, but is not what always happens. So you can't always count on this being your process, but it is very common. So usually it goes that you submit a job application, and then a certain amount of time later, you may be invited to a screening interview, which is usually a phone interview, which sometimes can be with a recruiter or a hiring manager or the supervisor that you might be working with if you got the job. So you can't always count on it being like the person that you're going to have the in-person interview with. It might be a different person that you do this initial screening interview with. And with this screening interview, usually the purpose is to just check if you're qualified generally. They'll usually ask about general background questions about your experience and sometimes like skills specific questions. So it's a really good idea before these type of interviews to study your resume and be very familiar with what you said that you could do and what you sent to them. Because usually the screening one, again, is going to be about your experiences, checking if you're qualified, kind of expanding on maybe some of the things that are on your resume. And you may be asked also about like salary or just general questions like that. So that's what usually happens. But again, you can't always count on that. So you'll still want to prepare for this screening interview or a phone interview as if it is a full interview, because they may ask you some other questions that you would usually think come like later in a full interview, but they may ask them early. So you'll just, even though you can kind of go in with some expectations that a screening interview will be about this information, you still want to prepare in all the ways that I'll be discussing throughout this presentation, just in case. And then usually after that screening interview, if you've made it to the next round and they want to learn more about you, then you'll usually be invited to the full interview or interviews. There may be multiple rounds depending on the position. So what is an interview? We probably all have some idea that it's something where we meet with a potential employer and they ask us questions about ourselves. But beyond that, I just wanted to make it very clear and point out that it is a mutual exchange of information between two parties in order for both to evaluate the fit between the applicant and the organization. So a couple of key points in this definition is that it is a mutual exchange of information. So of course, you want to be prepared that they're going to ask you a lot of questions and you're providing a lot of information, but also you want to be asking them questions as well, and really be ready to and like want to actually like learn about them and kind of like the environment that you would be in. So you are collecting information as well in any interview. And it is also important to consider and think about that this like second round or like later round interviews, they're really about the fit, because after that initial screening interview, you won't make it past that interview unless you're really qualified for the job. So once you go to like the more formal like later interviews, it's understood that you can do the job, you're qualified, but it's really about seeing like how you fit in that company, on that team. So yeah, there are kind of a lot of different things at play when you're like in those later interviews beyond just seeing if you're qualified for a job. And so interviews have different stages and kind of different things that you should be doing before, during, and after an interview. And we're going to go through each of those areas. So before the interview, a really important thing that you need to do is a lot of reflection. So you'll want to just really take the time to sit with yourself and think about these things. Think about your interests, skills, abilities, experience, education, goals, purpose, what motivates you. These are all things that you should be prepared to talk about and be ready if someone asks a question about any of these areas, you should be ready to answer that. Something else in addition to thinking about those kind of broad experiences and goals and things like that, you'll also want to reflect and think about a handful of very specific stories and examples from past experiences that communicate your value to an organization. And the way that you can choose like what stories you want to identify from your past experiences is using the job description. So based on whatever the job description is asking for, like they're going to say they want people with certain skills or experiences, then you have to, in your reflections, think about, okay, what is a time in my past where I've like exhibited these skills or that I've had this certain experience. And you really want to take the time early on to think of those stories and have them just kind of like ready to pull out in an interview and not literally, just talk about. And something else to do before an interview is thinking about and clean up your online presence if it needs to be cleaned up. We have a little stat here that according to a 2018 survey, 70% of employers use social media to screen their candidates. And that's, has been a couple of years ago. So most likely the number has gone up in terms of how many employers are screening candidates with social media. So it's really important, of course, to be putting out only the image that you want potential employers to see of you. And of course, you can do whatever you want with your personal social media. Just make sure it's private if there are things there that you wouldn't want potential employers seeing. So just whatever you think is appropriate or not, just make sure things are private if they need to be. Something else that to do before an interview is, of course, research as well. So in addition to thinking a lot about yourself and your experiences, you also want to research and learn about your potential employer. So in that research, you might be looking up the employer, the company's mission statement, their values, look into reports maybe that they've put out or that like other entities have done on that company. And also like just looking at their social media as well, like what is their kind of like branding, what do they post about, and you can learn a lot from that. So some tools that you can use in your research, of course, is the employer or company website. You should be very familiar with that and kind of know how to navigate that. Also just Googling them, looking for blogs about people like sharing their experiences working there or blogs that they put out. Also LinkedIn. On LinkedIn, you can look up companies and see like what open positions they have or who works there, or like see what type of posts that they're sharing just to learn more about them. And then Glassdoor is both a like large job board, but it also is a really good tool for research because you can look up certain companies and see what current or past employees have said about their experience working there. And also on Glassdoor, you can look up some people have shared their experience with like interviewing for certain companies for certain positions. And if they're very generous, they may even share kind of some questions they were asked or like how easy or difficult their interview was or like what the process was like. So Glassdoor is a really good resource to be looking at when you have an interview coming up. And also additionally, your own personal network, the people that you know. Ask around if you know anyone that is working or has worked at the company that you're applying to, or maybe is in like a similar position at a different company. You can ask about their interview process and how it went and what type of questions they were asked, just so you can collect a lot of information for yourself and really be as best prepared as you can going into an interview. Something else that you'll want to be do before an interview is seek clarification, be very aware and sure of all of the details of your interview. So of course, know the time that your interview is and be careful about time zones. If you know that the place you're interviewing is in a different time zone than yourself, like be very clear what the time is and if you need to account for the time change and stuff. Also, usually you would want to be very clear about the physical location of your interview. But nowadays, for right now, you'll just want to be more sure about the software that you're using to meet for an interview, and just make sure that you like have that software and it's working on your computer. Um, so yeah, and then also you want to clarify and be aware of who you're meeting with, and also the interview format. So if it's you're just meeting with one other person, or if it's a panel of people that are interviewing you, or you might be on a panel, like it might be multiple people interviewing you and other people at the same time. Um, or if there are multiple interviews in the process, like maybe you're meeting with different groups on the same day of an interview. So you just want to have all this information very clear, of course, before going in. And any company or organization should be able to provide you this information before an interview. And again, it just all helps you better prepare and kind of really be mentally ready for what you're getting into in your interview. And also, so some special considerations for interviews during this time is that they should all be phone and video interviews. You should not be having any in-person interviews right now. Um, so some special considerations for phone and video interviews is that you'll want to test your technology. If it's a phone interview, make sure that you have good phone reception wherever you will be interviewing. Of course, making sure you have good internet connection wherever you'll be interviewing. Making sure that the sound quality of your devices is good, both on your end in speaking and also in how you hear whoever you're talking to. And also that you have, again, whatever software you need downloaded and ready to go and know kind of like how to navigate it. Also, you want to think about your environment. So you need a quiet and ideally private space to be doing interviews in. And this is all kind of in the understanding of like recent upcoming interviews. Hopefully we don't have to worry about this as much in the future. But for now, definitely quiet, private space. If you live with other people, make sure that they know when and where you'll be interviewing in your living space, and just remind them to try not to disturb you during that time. Okay, so that was a lot of kind of the prep work that goes into how you prepare for an interview. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about other things to do to prepare on the day of, and then how to conduct yourself during an interview. Um, and just kind of, it's important to remember that you only get one chance to make a first impression, and that's kind of the theme going forward. So something to do on the day of is think about your personal presentation, like how you're physically presenting yourself. So you want to be dressing appropriately, of course, especially if it's a video interview. And even though, your bottom half may not be seen in a video interview, it might be a good idea to still kind of dress as if you were going to a real in-person interview, just to get yourself really mentally like in that space and kind of like ready for a formal interview. And of course, even though they're not going to be smelling you or anything, still a good idea to practice good personal hygiene, again, just to help that like you get into the right headspace. And make sure that you're in a well-lit area for a video interview so that you can be seen. And other things preparing on the day of, you'll want to do things that elevate your mood as much as possible. For myself, I like to listen, to kind of like upbeat dancing music and just do a little dance to kind of get myself, happy and really ready for an interview because it's much you will probably perform better if you're going into an interview happy and in a good headspace versus just super tense and stressed out. Um, so do whatever it is that you need to do to get in a good mood before an interview. You'll also want to be ready 10 to 15 minutes early before your interview, even if it's a phone or a virtual one. Usually for an in-person one, you want to like arrive to the interview place 10 to 15 minutes early. But even again, if you're just staying at home to interview, it's a good idea to be to not have anything like planned that goes up to like almost your interview start time. You just want to have that time to sit with yourself and really, again, just do whatever you need to get in that headspace and really be ready for the interview. And again, this is for a video interview, so you want to make sure that whatever is in your background, whatever is seen by the camera, is not too distracting, and all just things to be aware of to set the scene. Okay, so now everything from here, we're going to be talking about things that happen during the interview. So during the interview, you want to think about, of course, communication, but not only like the words that you're saying, but kind of how you're saying it, your tone, volume. For video interviews, like your body language, um, are so important, even though it's not in person. Even a phone interview, actually, I would say body language is important because depending on how you're sitting, if you're laying down or something, these things can affect your voice and how it sounds. And even like things like smiling, especially on phone interviews, is really important, especially if you're trying to say like that you're interested in the position and it makes you excited. If you're physically smiling, that can affect how your voice sounds. So even for a phone interview, body language is so important. And kind of you want all these different forms of communication to be like in agreement with each other. Like if the words that you're saying are that you are excited for this opportunity, you want your tone and body to be reflecting that. Something else you want to think about mirroring. So if you're not really kind of sure like how loud you should be talking or maybe how like formal or informal your tone should be, just let the interviewer or whoever the potential employer kind of like set the tone. Like if they're talking at a certain volume or are kind of being friendly and like a little jokey, then it's appropriate to also do that. So yeah, just let them set the tone, copy what they're doing. And also just remember that during kind of like late stage interviews, they often base hiring decisions more on how they feel about you than like the exact things that you said. Because again, like knowing that this is like more for the later stage after the screening, like again, it's understood that you can do the job, but they want to know like how they feel about you, how you work on their team, and like what kind of like energy you would be bringing to the position, things like that are important to think about in addition to like the words that you're saying. So just some tips. Ideally, if you're in person, you want to be making eye contact. If it's a video interview, like try to look at your camera as much as you can without like just staring straight at it the whole time. Again, just smiling, and no gum or food during an interview, whether it's phone or video or in person. Okay, so now we're going to get into some interview questions. So firstly, I just wanted to talk about some different types of questions. So there's behavioral questions, which are the ones that are like, tell me about a time when you did blah, 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 or when you experienced blah, blah, blah. That really they want to like know about how you've done things in the past to kind of get an idea of how you might address a similar situation in the future. Technical questions might be part of your interview. Again, like with this example, if it's something where you would be doing coding in the position, they may have like a problem for you to actually do during the interview. Or like I was saying with my experience interviewing for something that was like event planning heavy, like they had us plan an event together, like as part of the interview. Or even I've had it in an individual interview where I've been taken to a computer and kind of like had to like write out how I would plan an event or like write an agenda for a workshop. That those are also kind of like technical things that may come up in an interview. Other types of questions might be probing. So this is like a cue to you, like if you're responding to a question and then they have follow-up questions, like something, things like, can you tell me more about that? Or can you expand a little bit on that? That should be a cue to you that you're not saying enough when you're answering their questions. If they keep asking you for like a little more details, just know that that means that you should be trying to talk more and try to go into more detail, because you don't ideally wouldn't want to get too many probing questions. Yeah. And so I'm going to get into now what I call, or what is called, the Carl method, which is a way that you answer behavioral questions, because those are a very specific type of question, like to tell me about a time when you did this. So the way you want to answer that, because it's really important to have like a very full answer to those type of questions, so they can really see like how you would, again, address a similar situation in the future. So CARL stands for context, action, result, and learning. So when you are answering a behavioral type question or giving an example of something, you always want to start with setting the context a little. Don't assume that they would know like the entire context around the situation that you're describing. Um, and of course, you don't want to go into like too much detail, since that's not the most important part of answering the question, but just set the stage for them a little so they kind of know what the situation is that you were in, and kind of like what was supposed to get done. And then you want to talk about your actions, or what you did to address the objectives of the situation, and like what you specifically were responsible for and how you contributed. And then you want to talk about results. So what came of the actions that you took, and it can be positive or negative. That's totally fine. And also if there were any notable accomplishments. And then lastly, very important, is to talk about learning. So what did you learn from this situation, and what you did and what became of it, and how will you take that with you in the future into different positions? So even if it was like a positive or negative experience, especially if it was a negative experience, you definitely want to be talking about what you learned and like how you would behave differently in the future. So because this is like a pretty big sort of question, and your response should be fairly detailed. I just put this example here of describe a time when you faced a professional challenge and how you overcame it. So I'll go ahead and read this. A response might be, context, I was an intern at a small company called Dreams Come True, which provides terminally ill children with fun experiences. And I was asked to develop a new electronic filing system to replace the paper files in our office. This was initially a challenge for me because I had never done something like this before and did not know how to start organizing so much information. I decided to do some research online to see how other people had accomplished similar tasks, and learned about a software that helps put information from scanned documents into Excel sheets. I spent some time learning how to use the software, and then I was able to use it to organize the information from our paper files into an Excel sheet, so now it can be easily sorted through. And because of this new electronic system, clients and other staff members are now able to update their information online without filling out a new paper form each time, and it's much easier to search for specific information. All files were updated into the new system in a timely manner, and our clients and team members expressed being more satisfied as a result. And from this experience, I learned that when I'm faced with a task that I don't know how to address, I can do research to see what others have done and ask people with more experience than me for advice. Then I can identify what I need to learn in order to accomplish the task effectively. This practice of researching and consulting experts for best practices and overcoming challenges is something that I can definitely apply in all my future positions. So this is kind of long, and it feels kind of long, especially I think it looks long, but when you say it out loud, I was talking and I didn't time myself, but I might have been talking for like a minute and a half to 2 minutes at the most. So it really, even if it like feels long, you may not actually be talking for as long as you think. And it's totally fine to spend like 2, 3 minutes like talking about each question, or even longer than that if it's like a longer question or like a situation that needs more explanation. Um, you do want to kind of think about having fairly long responses, like, appropriately detailed. Okay, and then usually for this presentation, at this point, I have an activity where I give everyone a handout that has these kind of like fill-in spaces for Carl responses for different questions, and we're not able to do that right now, but I still just wanted to share this with you to show you that it's a tool for like, especially when you have an interview coming up. You'll want to think about these different things like teamwork, problem solving, organization, and have a specific story that you can tell that shows that skill. Um, so yeah, and if you want this handout, it also has like more categories and like a whole back page. So feel free to email me and I can happily share it with you. But yeah, so it's a really good tool when you're preparing for interviews. And again, like I was saying earlier, to identify different stories that you might want to share and just be prepared to share. Okay, so now we're moving past Carl to talk about just other common interview questions and how to answer them. So firstly, these two questions, tell me about yourself and why you're interested in this position, are probably at least 95% of the time going to be the first questions that you're asked in an interview. So knowing that, it's really important to prepare for these because again, you can almost guarantee that you're going to be asked them. Um, so with tell me about yourself, you want to be like they just want to know. They want to know about you. So you want to tell a story sort of how essentially how you got to where you are today in a clear and concise way, but not too concise because you do want to be thinking about and planning to talk for like 3 to 5 minutes. They do really want to hear a story and just like know. You might kind of go through your professional and educational history and say, especially maybe if you're coming from a different industry or have experience in a different industry than what you're interviewing for, you can explain like what brought you to this new field, what of your experiences like led you to the next experience, and then how did that lead you here to be interviewing for this position. So you really are just telling a story, and it shows like both like your history, your experience history, but also your personality. And kind of this is really the place to shine and kind of you can be like sort of funny and show a lot of personality if it's appropriate, because you're really just telling your story. Um, and then almost always the next question, or they're combined together, is why are you interested in this position? So with this one, also, you want to be showing your excitement, even if it's a position that you're just interviewing for because you just need a job and you need some income. You'll still want to try to find something that you can get excited about and really show that you've done your research into the position and the company. So even if it's even if you consider it maybe like a very entry level position that's not really ideally in your field, like still try to find something that you are like genuinely interested in, or just pick something that you can say that you're excited about, because that really makes a difference. Like it's very clear when someone is not genuinely interested in the position and maybe they're just interviewing to kind of get the practice of interviewing. That can definitely come off in an interview, and usually those people don't get chosen for the position, because of course the employer only wants to hire someone that really wants to be there. um, yeah, just very important to prepare for these questions, because again, you can almost always count on that they'll be the first questions that you're asked. Some other common questions might be ones around strengths or weaknesses. So for questions about your strengths, in addition to just like saying 2 to 3 strengths, what they are, you'll also kind of want to do a maybe abbreviated Carl response where you give an example of how you've used that strength and how it's helped you. Um, and yeah, so with strengths especially, it's very important to give an example beyond just saying that you have a certain strength. Because in essence, you're kind of providing like evidence. You can think of it that way. You're providing evidence of the strength that you're saying you have. And then with weaknesses, of course, you want to be honest. It's very, as someone who's done like conducted interviews for other people or has like reviewed a lot of practice interviews, it can come off as very not genuine when someone says a weakness and like they're describing it and then they say, but actually, I feel like this can be a strength in some situations. That's not the question. The question is about what a weakness is, not, a weakness that you feel like also can be a strength. So yes, you do want to be very honest when you're asked a question about this. But there is an extent kind of that you want to go to. Like you wouldn't want to say a weakness that's related to the core functions of the position you're interviewing for. So for example, if you're interviewing for a position in sales, you probably wouldn't want to say that one of your weaknesses is that you're very shy. That's probably, not, I don't know why you would be interviewing for that position. So yeah, you want to say, be honest about a weakness, but make sure that it's not something that's super related to the core functions of the position. And in addition to saying the weakness, you always want to follow that with saying how you're working on improving on it or how you have tried to improve on it in the past. And then another common question might be, where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years? And you don't, with questions like this, don't feel like you have to say that you want to be with that company in the future. But if you do want to be that company, definitely say that because that's something that's very good and something that they would probably be happy to hear. But even again, if you don't see yourself in this position or in this company in the future, you can say that. That's totally fine. But you'll want to say also kind of how you see this position that you're interviewing for helping you get to whatever your future goals are. Because they always want to know that you see like value in the position that you're wanting to enter, even if it's not something that you want to stay with long term. And something else for this question is you want to think about some ambitious but realistic short and long-term goals, just so they know that you're like invested in this and like are very self-aware and kind of like have goals that you're working toward. That's, yeah, attractive applicants, have goals. Yeah. Then I wanted to talk about some questions that you should not be getting asked ever in an interview. Questions that are illegal for companies to ask about are things around race, national origin, citizenship, age, religion, marital family status, disabilities, gender, sex, or sexual orientation. In California specifically, interviewers cannot ask about arrest records or military service. So if you do get asked any of questions around these identities or things, that should be a red flag to you to know that, they shouldn't be asking this, and it's kind of strange that they are. So yeah, just know that you should not be asked about any of these, and if you are, that should be a little red flag to you. Okay. And then, so now we've gone through this interview, they've asked us all their questions, and then always the last question that they ask you, most likely, will be, do you have any questions for us? So you always, always, always need to have questions prepared to ask them during the interview. So these should be some positive future focus questions that incorporate you in the company and really show that you can see yourself there and that you are very genuinely interested in them and in working there. So some questions you might ask, especially if one of your interviewers is the person that would be supervising or managing you in this position, you can ask about if they can describe their management style. Also asking why you enjoy working here. I love asking that question because it gives me a break from talking, because people usually enjoy talking about things that they enjoy. Um, and this also can be a very telling question, if it's maybe like hard for the people to answer this question. That's probably not a good sign. And you do also just you should want to like genuinely learn about what it's like to work there and what are the good things that you can be excited about. You can also ask things like, what have past employees done to succeed in this position? How would you describe a typical workday? How do you support employees' professional development? So if like going to conferences and like working on your skills outside of your workplace is something that's important to you, this would be an important question to ask, because some companies will provide like professional development funds and like will pay for people to go to conferences or like travel to like engage with others or learn new things. So that's a really good question to ask too. And then this last one is can be maybe a hard question to ask sometimes, but is there anything leaving you with hesitancy for hiring me for this position? It's very important to word a question like that in a way like that, because essentially you're kind of asking like, why are there any reasons that you don't want to hire me? But wording it in a way that is kind of more formal and not as like attacky. So saying it in this way, like, is there anything leaving you with hesitancy for hiring me? It still can be a good question to ask because it shows that you want feedback and that you take feedback and seek it out, which is a really good thing that people to do. And also it just gives you the opportunity, like if they are kind of like, there is something in their mind that they are worried about, that you can address that in that moment, like that's before you leave the interview. For example, they might be worried, like if you ask this, maybe they say something like, we're a little worried that you don't have enough years of experience for this position. Then you have the opportunity to address that and say something like, that, yeah, that's true. I don't have too many years of experience yet, but in every position that I've started, I was new and I had to learn new things. And I have done that effectively in the past. For example, there was this situation where blah, 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 blah. So you can kind of address worries that they have, if they share any with you. And then the very last thing that you should always ask is what the next steps are in the process. So things like, when can you expect to hear back? If they say there's like any other interviews, be prepared for that. So yeah, your last question should always be around what the next steps are. Okay, so now we've made it through the interview. And sometimes this is actually the hardest part, is just waiting afterwards. So some things that you want to do after the interview is, of course, more reflection. So almost always after an interview, you're going to have a lot of thoughts and things like, oh, I really wish I had said this, or maybe I wish I hadn't said this other thing, or wish I talked more about this particular thing. So you're going to have a lot of thoughts like that after an interview. So it's really important that you do whatever you need to do to get those thoughts and feelings like outside of you. So if that's like journaling, writing to yourself, or talking to someone about the interview and how it went, it's really important to do, again, whatever you can to kind of like release those thoughts as much as you can. So when you're talking to someone or journaling about it, think about if there was anything that caught you by surprise in the interview, if there were anything that you could have done that you feel like would have better prepared you, um, because you'll also want to be thinking about like, how you can improve for the future. Also think about what you learned from the interview. Like maybe there was something that was said um, when you were asking them questions that was news to you, or maybe made you like think differently about the position or the company. Um, and also think about like writing pros and cons for working for the company. Again, maybe you learned something that you found that you actually didn't like. That's totally fine. And this isn't on the slide, but even when you're interviewing for something and kind of like at the end of the interview, you realize, oh, actually, I don't really want this position. That's totally fine. You can just follow up with them right after the interview and say, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to interview me and everything, but for X, Y, Z reason, I'm no longer interested in pursuing this position. So that's totally fine. That happens a lot. So don't feel bad or anything about after going through an interview and realizing that you actually don't want the position. Totally fine. Just tell them as soon as you can. Something else that you want to do after is always send a thank you note or an email within 24 hours after the interview. So even if it's like a screening interview, you can just send a quick thank you email to the person. But definitely after a more formal interview, if you can, send like a physical, well, actually, probably right now you wouldn't want to send a physical note because you wouldn't know where to send it, but you can always send an email. And even in the future, like when you go back to in-person interviews, like you can send a physical little like thank you card. It's a really nice thing to do. And like, again, show that you're very invested and interested in the position. So things that you should do in the thank you, you should very succinctly and like concisely highlight your interest and say maybe like something specific that you learned during the interview that you really liked or made you very happy and excited. And also like very briefly highlight how there's a good match between you and the company or like how you would be a good fit for the position, just very briefly, in addition to, of course, like thanking them for their time. Things you should not do in the thank you is go into a lot of detail about your interest, or really, you shouldn't really be saying new information in the thank you. You shouldn't be like, you shouldn't make them have new questions for you. If you have any questions that you like maybe forgot to ask, that maybe are more like logistical questions, like totally fine for you to ask that in the thank you. So yeah, you shouldn't really be providing a lot of new information. Like it's not really the space when you're thinking about after your interview and you're thinking, oh, I should have said this one thing. Like that's not, the thank you isn't really the place to like say that new information. It's kind of understood and expected that you should have like got everything out during the actual interview. And the thank you again is really just to say thank you. And to again highlight your interest and say that you're looking forward to hearing back from them and stuff like that. And then lastly, so following up after an interview. So when you ask in the interview like what the next steps are, they should be telling you like a timeline of when you can expect to hear back. So you really just have to wait for however long they told you. And if they give you a certain date that you should expect to hear back by, still wait 1 to 2 days if you haven't heard anything after that date, just because something may have come up for them. They're busy, like doing a lot of different things. So just give them like a 1 to 2 day grace period, because something that's outside of their control might have prevented them from getting back to you right away. But if those 1 to 2 days after they said you'd hear back and you haven't heard anything, then just send them a short email saying something like, hi, I'm just checking in to see where you are in your decision process and if I can answer any additional questions you may have. Because you just want to let them know that you're still there, you're still waiting to hear from them, but you're not like pressuring them in any way. It's just kind of a reminder that like, hey, I'm still here. I'm still interested in this position. Just want to see where you are. Um, so yeah, that's that's what I have for in terms of content for this presentation.